Guys, I want to show you this lecture from Nancy Eisenberg, PhD, and she wrote the book White Trash, the 400-year history of class in America. Let's go.
In the blood. Now, it's not surprising, given as we've seen blood.
Let's just
The vagrant stain was now congenital in the blood. Now, it's not surprising, given as we've seen that the question of white trash is becoming more prominent. It also is moving to the center of politics, and it plays a rather significant role at the center of the sectional crisis. When we look at the Civil War and the debates leading up to it and during the Civil War, what we find is that Lincoln's Republican Party insisted that slavery should not be allowed to spread west because it threatened free labor among the poor white men. Now, future Confederates responded with a strident defense of their slave and class system. Like James Henry Hammond of South Carolina, more and more of the Southern elite held that class subordination was natural, and that Jefferson's, this is what he wrote, Jefferson's "all men are created equal" was, as Hammond insisted, a ridiculously absurd concept. Now, Hammond was South Carolina's leading pro-slavery intellectual. He also coined the term mudsill. And mudsill is an interesting term because it served all the purposes, to both attack the North, to defend slavery, as well as hold up the class hierarchy in the South. It was mudsill democracy that the Confederacy described as it made its case against the North. In 1861, Southerners mocked the Mudsill Union Army as a foul collection of urban roughs, prairie dirt farmers, greasy mechanics, and unwashed immigrants. President Jefferson Davis called the Union Army, in one of his major speeches, our favorite word again, the offscourings of the earth. Now, this mudsill term came from Hammond's 1858 speech. And he was arguing that what was essential to the Southern structure of society was the fixed nature of class identity. In all societies, he said, there must be a class to do the menial duties, to perform the drudgery of life. And he insisted that those with fewer skills, lower order of intellect, they should form the base of every civilized nation. Every advanced society had to exploit its petty laborers. The working poor that wallowed in the mud allowed for a superior class to emerge on top. And the one that emerged on top was the true society that embodied all civilization, progress, and refinement.
Y'all heard that? Let's take it back a bit.
Menial duties to perform the drudgery of life. And he insisted that those with fewer skills, lower order of intellect, they should form the base of every civilized nation. Every advanced society had to exploit its petty laborers. The working poor that wallowed in the mud allowed for a superior class to emerge on top. And the one that emerged on top was the true society that embodied all civilization, progress, and refinement.
So that's really the plan. It's so that poor people can be distracted, work their lives away, and then the rich people can be on top and be the true civilized people, the ones who actually deserve everything. And then low skilled, it just means that, you know, they don't have time to sit and do what they want for themselves. They don't have free time to think, whereas rich people, they have the ones at the bottom work for them to build their houses, and then they can sit and think about their futures. And the people at the bottom have to stay there because those people can do the tasks that nobody else wants to do. But the truth is, I'm sure there are people who can genuinely love building houses, you know, people who can genuinely love cleaning toilets, you know, digging up holes and making sewer systems and all of that good stuff. People can genuinely like it. It's just that they don't want to go out and get people who love what they love the work they do. They just want to go out and throw anybody up on the field and be like, okay, you will work and I'm gonna force you to and even if you don't like it, well, whatever. But then now we have jobs and they're like, well, we can't hire workers without a passion. And so we have people who are faking, acting like, yeah, I'm passionate about this, I want to work my life away. And that's interesting too, because people have to be fake and act like they're passionate about a job they're not passionate in.
In Hammond's mind, menial laborers were almost literally mudsills, stuck in the mud, or perhaps a metaphor, quicksand. If all societies had their mudsills, Hammond argued, the South had made the right choice in keeping black slaves in the lowest station. And he defended this on racial terms. He went on to argue, and this is just as important in his case, he argued that the white mudsills of the North, he argued that the North had debased their own kind. And he said that the white mudsills of the North were, quote, of your own race. You are brothers of one blood. From Hammond's perspective, the North's flawed labor system had corrupted democratic politics. Discontented whites had been given the vote, and being the majority, it was only a matter of time before these poor northern mudsills orchestrated a class revolution, destroying what was left of the Union. And as you can guess, the Confederate elites were equally afraid of their own white trash, that they might be tempted by the democratic promises and join the revolt. Now, what's interesting about the Civil War, it's not surprising that from the Union's perspective, and from the perspective of Republican politicians, that they...
I want to pause. They were afraid of revolt. They were afraid of the whites revolting. And then I think during the time of, like, slavery, you know, they got afraid of the slaves revolting. And then they get afraid of people protesting in the streets and people not showing up to their jobs. So then they just think of, okay, how can I make sure people can work and only work and can never protest anything I make them do? Because if people are happy, I do think that production, like the speed of innovation, would be slower. I do personally think that. And I think if people are happier, they wouldn't get the work done as quickly as they'd want to. And this, I mean, like the rich people at the top. Because honestly, a lot of people, they live for their lives outside of work. They do want to hang out with their family, and they want to hang out with their friends, and they want to, like, you know, frolic, dance in the fields. And yeah, rich people, they're like, no, I need you to keep on working and creating things for me to consume.
They would want to exploit the class divisions between the planter, elite, and poor whites. In General Grant's estimation, the war was fought to liberate not only slaves, but non-slaveholders, those families exiled to poor land who had few opportunities to better themselves. They too needed emancipation, he insisted, and he used the precise term, poor white trash, when he described their pre-war subservience to the planter aristocracy. It's also not surprising that Abraham Lincoln would be crowned the president of the Mudsills. His humble Kentucky birthplace made him white trash in the eyes of many Southerners, and his chosen residence in Illinois made him a prairie mudsill. But what's so interesting, and this is sort of about the power of language, Union soldiers turned the invective on its head, deciding to wear the mudsill label as a badge of pride, and made it a rallying cry for Northern-style democracy. Now, what's happened by the Civil War and continues in Reconstruction is that the way white trash is being used has been highly politicized. It is not only talking about a distinct group of people, but it is also defending two different economic systems as they are being contrasted, the North and the South. It's also not surprising that this battle over classes would also reemerge in the 1890s, and this time we would begin to see the term redneck. This is the first time that we see redneck become a more popular concept, and it's closely identified with the new Democratic demagogues of the South. South Carolina's Ben Tillman, Arkansas's Jeff Davis, and Mississippi's James Vorderman.
Okay, I wanted you to listen to this last.
Sociologists and others, is there is a real tension when we think about, I mean, one of the critiques I have is we can't just talk about the working class as a single unified class either. And the election really played off a whole series of things that were seen as opposites and as being contested. And that is the idea that we have an urban and rural divide. We have the language of cosmopolitan versus provincial. We have the idea of privileged elites versus how many people who imagine themselves as both upscale rednecks and white trash who would see themselves as the disinherited. And that to me was a very revealing concept, because that again got me back to the idea of land. And it also gets into why there's so much resentment against immigrants, against groups that they see who are somehow being given handouts or privileges from the federal government that somehow is taking away from them. And they see that the latter has been rigged, and that somehow they can't compete because the government is somehow favoring these groups. But this is part of the problem of our history. We never seem to acknowledge that the government has helped all sorts of people. I always, go back to World War II and the GI Bill, which my father benefited from, and no one sort of saw that as necessarily an undeserving welfare. And even today, what is so interesting about working class and poor rural Americans is that they prefer to get disability than welfare. Because disability, and these people have serious injuries because they're doing really demanding, difficult, and physically, the kinds of jobs that do lead to serious physical problems. But there's the question of honor and reputation, and this problem of where do we get our identity from? If you imagine that your identity comes, as many poor rural Americans, it comes from your family, it comes from your community, you're not just going to pack your bags and move, because that's kind of been the source of who you are. So the idea that individualism, that every individual should just go off and make a living, doesn't take into account the way in which people in rural America actually live and what they value. And I think that's one of the things we have to think about, because I think that one of the things that the election raised is this: we have to have a debate in this country, and we're already having a debate about the relationship between how we measure what work means and civic virtue, and how those two things are.
So beyond that, I thought she had an interesting point. As usual, thanks for listening. Bye.